Welcome to Hive Time, a beekeeping podcast for all types of beekeepers, whether you're a backyard beekeeper or a commercial beekeeper. My name is Mike James. I am your host, and today I have Cory Stevens on from Stevens Bee Co. out of Missouri. He raises queen bees with VSH qualities, and today we talk about kind of his operations, VSH, and where we think potentially the industry's going. And I hope you enjoyed as much as I enjoyed recording it. So let's jump right into it.
I'm Cory Stevens. I've been keeping bees for, I think, around 14 years. This may be the start of my 14th year, something like that. Maybe it's 13 years. But anyway, I run possibly 150 plus colonies southeast Missouri.
That's mainly for breeding purposes, or?
Yeah. I mean, we produce honey as well. Like if you've got healthy bee colonies, you know, you're going to have a honey crop too, even though this is kind of a crappy area for honey production.
Is it really?
Ridge. Yeah. If you get out into the crops and stuff, it's a little bit better, but where I'm out on the ridge, like it could be hit or miss. But, you know, it's good for producing bees, which that's my main focus. You know, like we only run 150 colonies or so, but we usually raise 2,000 or better queens each year. But whenever I say that, it's not mated queens, you know, like I stopped doing that several years ago.
So what was, I mean, I dabbled around just a little bit on your guys' site, just kind of get a feel for some of the things that you guys do. And, you know, that was one of kind of my major questions was why do you, I mean, besides, well, I guess maybe not so obvious, you know, we're going to have people listening that really kind of don't have any idea how queen bees are bred. And then you've got some that probably are breeding them. So, I guess I won't refer to it as an obvious question, but why virgin queens versus mated ones? And obviously there's some extra time in having them mated.
Definitely. It just comes down to labor and cost, production costs. Like I have a day job too. I'm corporate transportation for Nestle Purina. So, you know, it's a pretty sizable company. I work from home. So, you know, I've got insurance and all that good stuff in retirement. But it came down to time. You're basically buying my free time, you know, because I take a lot of time off to work because I'm a workaholic. But, you know, if you were producing open mated queens, here's the way I envision it. We're not in South Georgia. We're not in Florida. So we have a short season, maybe mid-April to mid-June, sometimes early April to mid-June. But you think about even if you bumped it up to $40 or $50 for a mated queen, which is kind of pushing it, you know, really, how many rounds, if I leave them in a full 3 weeks, can I do in that time? Versus if I just sell the nucleus colony, we sell our open mated nukes for $225. So why would I go through all that extra labor for less money? You know what I mean? It just wasn't making sense. I think that the bee prices, packages, and nukes ran off and left open mated queens. And I looked at it like I was selling the heart out of the watermelon for cheap. And that's the best part. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
And it just stopped.
Well, I even think because you're selling them around 20, is it $28 for the virgins?
They're 25 if you just get a few, but if it's 10 or more, it's $20, which, you know, we usually throw in freebies too, just in case somebody craps out or something. I don't want to have to pay, I guarantee a live delivery, and I don't want to pay next day air to replace 1 or 2 queens, you know? So, but all of our stock is VSH tested. We don't use any treatments on it, strictly because that is my main focus, like you said, is breeding for mite and disease resistance. And if I don't put anything on them, it gets pretty obvious pretty quick who has it and who doesn't. So I put natural selection up at its, I would say, rightful place to sort the wheat from the chaff. And then whatever I have left, you know, goes through standard, you know, master beekeeper selection of productivity, you know, calm on the comb, good brood, disease resistance, mite resistance. And Then I VSH test my favorites, and those go into the gene pool. And we do instrumentally inseminated breeder queens. So that's another reason I ditched open mated, is because I just do cells and virgins, or instrumentally inseminated breeder queens.
Okay. So, I mean, honestly, being it's VSH, I always have a hard time saying that. I would think that you'd be able to get even more for them, even virgins.
Probably, but I feel like I was the one bucking the system at first, like everybody's
well,
like,
I think most treatment-free VSH people,
well,
maybe not so much maybe not VSH. Maybe that's kind of become a little bit more mainstream.
Yeah.
But treatment-free certainly is still bucking the system. And so, you and I had a call yesterday where we kind of briefly talked about things, but it's, I think it's got to kind of go that way. We were talking about that Be Informed partnership surveys, and how, and granted, like, it's voluntary. So data could be a little off, right? And there's whispers that the numbers that are going to be coming out for last winter are going to be around the 70%. And what I did was I just quickly pulled up their website. If anyone could do it, it's beinformed.org. And on the bottom of the page, they have the latest one state by state. So you can hover over them, and like, Missouri, for instance, well, Missouri's actually kind of low, 39.2, but Illinois, 63.3. Wisconsin, 54.6, Minnesota, 59.1, Utah had 72. This was all last year. Right. And so, I mean, the people that are doing treatment free, obviously me, I've got some experience doing it, not quite like you are, but those first years are your most difficult, right? As you're sorting out which queens are going to be your champions, or what stock, I guess, you'd like to kind of start breeding off of, grafting off of. And so that first year, I could probably say is probably the worst, right? Like, you throw a bunch of random queens in there if you're not already buying them from like someone like yourself, hoping that at least you got one, that's going to be able to treat them. Yeah. And then building off of that. And then at that point it becomes all about the drones, right? But year two, 60-70% probably would be accurate, I would imagine, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and I mean, it's going to vary between different people. My story is kind of an anomaly because I was treating and I was having poor winter survival, poor production, blatant disease issues, chalk brood, mite issues, parasitic mite syndrome, deformed wing virus, K-wing. I had it all. It was pretty pitiful. And so,
petri dish.
Yeah, exactly. It was a nice little sample of everything that could go wrong. Welcome to beekeeping. And so I bought breeders from Tom Glenn. I didn't even know how to raise queens yet. Like, I totally went off the deep end and put the cart before the horse. I'm not recommending everyone do this, but I bought VSH breeders. And then every time that I saw a trash hive or something that was a total cull, I would just replace the queen. And I didn't put anything on them because I'm curious, I'm an entomologist. I wanted to see what happened. And to my surprise, within 6 weeks or so of a successful introduction of those VSH queens, no K-wing, no withered wing, no chalk brood, no.
That quick, huh?
Yeah.
So a cycle of the bees.
Yep. It takes a while for that queen to kick in. And once that brood nest is predominantly carrying her genetics, you should see it right away if she actually has what it takes, and sometimes they don't. Right. But out of a breeder like that, they were super concentrated and they did extremely well because Tom Glenn, a hero of mine, knew what he was doing. So the thing is like, I went from a more of a miserable survival rate to 10% or less loss annually at the same time that I ditched treatment. But I did a complete 180 on my genetics. So that was the determining factor. And then after I saw how impactful and because I'm from the show me state. I have to see it. You got to show me. I'm not going to believe you just because you said you're a treatment-free
Right.
successful guy. I mean, I saw the proof was in the pudding, and then I'm like, well, maybe I don't need to put this stuff in here, And Tom Glenn was the one that kind of inspired me to do that. The guy that was producing breeders, because he said, basically he arrived at the conclusion that we had to go to some kind of host resistance rather than chemical treatments, because he likes to eat burr comb, which I do too. I'll just shave it out of my hive and lift my bale up and eat it. And he was cutting a big piece of burr comb out, and his hive tool stopped on a fluvalinate or an apistan strip, and he wouldn't eat the comb. He's like, "What are we doing?" And that just knocked me over whenever he said that, because I'm like, what are we doing? And I'm not saying you should. I'm not dogmatic. Most of my friends treat, some of them don't. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, but I mean, you can go back to an IPM perspective, which as a trained entomologist, that's what they drill into our head, whenever I was going through all that training to work on my master's. And
so kind of maybe explain that a little bit. So as you were going to school, you felt that the system itself was really drilling in the chemical aspect?
No, that's the kicker, is it doesn't. But the thing is, we ignore the foundation piece, or the cornerstone. The holy grail of any IPM program is host resistance. That's
right.
the only thing that can get you off the chemical treadmill to where you're bent over the barrel and you're reliant wholly on. I'm not saying we shouldn't have some reliance on the chemicals,
right?
If it's things are getting out of hand, but complete reliance on it is unacceptable in my eyes, because you're vulnerable.
Yes.
And so
and I would agree.
Look at,
Right. And that's kind of what set me off really researching and starting that process. Was, to me, it just purely was a crutch for the genes. And you look at, I mean, I can't think of a real great example, so I'll probably just totally butcher the heck out of this, but I'm a deer hunter, and a lot of people are, and you think of just not even just the nature evolving around nature, but and granted we're nature, but let's call humans not nature. The deer, let's say a deer that walks out in the middle of the day, it might have the genes that just likes to be out during the day, right? And that deer is likely to get shot because of man. And if you look back 150, 200 years ago, with people coming to this country, what do we have? We have deer out everywhere during the day, right? And it could be, I'm just speculating, that, and this could be just a horrible example, but it could be that the deer that preferred to be outside during the day got shot. Those genes didn't pass on, and so therefore we don't see deer outside very often anymore.
Or they move at night more, or they adjust. Yeah, naturally. Right. It's always a give and take with nature.
Right. Yeah. And so, that aspect could fall into all sorts of different scenarios, right? Like maybe an animal has a taste for a poisonous mushroom. Well, that animal dies. Every single one that has that taste bud that wants to eat that poisonous mushroom and dies is removed from the gene pool.
Yep.
And I kind of view the bees a bit in the same way, that, and then we have man who just continues to prop up. And I'm not saying that people that are chemical treating are bad by any means. Right, I'm not saying that whatsoever. Same. I think there's a time and a place. And I think that for commercial beekeepers, it's a whole different conversation.
Yep. Because my livelihood's not based solely on this. Now, it's a large chunk of it, so I care. But at the same time, like if I lost all my bees, every single one of them, which hasn't happened, I've not treated in over a decade. I've still got more bees than I've ever had. But, I wouldn't starve to death. So I don't blame them for doing that. But that goes right back to an IPM protocol, and as to where you treat as little as possible. Because if you treat constantly, what immediately happens? Pest resistance, which is what we're hearing about now.
That's a whole other aspect.
Exactly. Because they're putting selection pressure on it. Heavy selection pressure. So the deer that only travel at night populate, whereas this time the mites that don't get killed by that particular acaricide or miticide are breeding and making mite resistant. So then we have to try to find a new chemical and a new chemical.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, we're killing a bug on a bug. There's a very tight window of efficacy.
Yep. There's always a trade-off, you know, and you can kill them, but you're also negatively affecting the health of your bee exactly for the reason you just stated, is because you're killing a bug on a bug. But if you go back to that IPM protocol and you actually use something with strong host resistance, and then you're sampling to see if you're getting your butt kicked by mites. If you're not getting your butt kicked, don't do anything about it. You know what I'm saying? If you are, or if somebody moves in next to you and you have some ungodly mite load and you quantify it and sample it, you know, take them out. But
well, and that was something that, you know, my understanding and practice has been to measure that the mites and determine which ones have a heavier load and replace the queen. But you brought up a good point when we were chatting before that, you know, it could be that they just robbed a mite loaded hive and just brought them back, and you're getting a bit of an inaccurate picture of what's really going on.
You nailed it. And that's why I do VSH testing, because you asked me yesterday, I think, if I was sampling or what if I was doing alcohol washes predominantly, and I said no, which most people will probably go, what? Who's this?
People are grinding their teeth right now.
Yeah, exactly. Beforehand, I still didn't do alcohol washes, but I would just watch them. And like I said, any sign of disease, anything I didn't like, any sign of they're getting their butts handed to them by mites, immediately I requeened them. That fixed a lot of problems. You're still going to have issues, you know. I mean, mite resistant still get hungry.
What is your process for testing the VSH out of your stock? Do you only do your top stock, or do you do all of them?
No, I only do whoever I'm thinking about keeping. So basically the cream of the crop is who I VSH test. And then that's the last hurdle. So natural selection first. You know, I don't do any kind of odd hive design or any kind of different kind of comb size, or, you know what I mean, like small cell or anything. I just do standardized equipment because I wanted it to be a genetic solution, not a mechanical or a what's the word I'm looking for? Standard management. I didn't want it to be management. So I manage like everyone else. And then I let natural selection have its way. Then I take out whatever I don't like, you know, like somebody that's hyper aggressive. Like I just found one of those, like they don't straighten up in the next 4 weeks. They're going to get split and she's going to get whacked, and I'm going to give them another queen. And so after that, then the best of the best of the best that makes it through all that criteria, then I VSH select those, because it's kind of time consuming. It's not as bad as people think, but it is time consuming.
I would imagine with the natural selection, because you've got pretty much, I mean, unless you do it a different way, I envision you are the entire season, right?
Oh yeah, it's got to
bring them through the season. What doesn't make it through the winter doesn't make it through the winter.
Yep, at least one season. A lot of the breeders I'm grafting out of are multi-season instrumentally inseminated breeders. That's a concentration of my stock.
The same queen multi-season?
Well, I've got several, and like every week I alternate who I'm grafting out of, because I want to keep that diversity in there too. You know, I don't want it to get too narrow. I want nice looking brood patterns. So yeah, but I mean, one of the ones I grafted off of last week, she's a 2-year-old instrumentally inseminated breeder queen. She was in a double deep that she had packed out with 3 honey supers that are ready to harvest already. So massive big colonies. So they need to be productive too, because, you know, there's some bees that'll survive. I call them like a Tom Seeley bee, because Tom would talk about, you know, these that would they would stay small, they would swarm often, and they would stay small, and they survived. Well, that's worthless in a commercial environment. You know, we want to be able to make queens. We want to be able to make splits. We want to be able to pollinate, you know, and maybe people are doing commercial pollination. I personally don't do that, but you want productive bees. You want a good honey crop, you know. So
Right. And one of the things that Michael Bush had brought up that I really had never thought of, and maybe I'm just a big dummy, but um, drones and the queen, there's what, however many drones that queen mates with or has been inseminated with
mhm.
represents potential different types of workforce
Yep.
genetics within the hive. And so as
And
long as one of those or two of those, a percentage of those eggs that are being fertilized has that VSH quality and is a volume that can manage the hive, because I mean, like if it's only 5%, they probably will not. It's like one sweeper at a baseball stadium, just
yeah,
not going to
not
get the
gonna keep
job done.
exactly right. That's a
Right.
good representation.
Right.
You're
And so one of the things that I always was thinking, well, it is possible to have like the Tom Seeley type drone be within a productive colony, but it can't represent a massive percentage of the uh, drone genetics.
right. But with VSH, I've seen monstrous colonies that are easy to work, not aggressive, nice brood patterns that are 100% VSH. They will allow 0% mite reproduction. So we can have our cake
Really?
and eat it too. That's the thing why some people, I think it's an imaginary goal that we're working towards, but I've seen it. So it's not imaginary. Is it easy?
Well,
No.
I've even heard people from the University of Minnesota on a podcast, I think about a year ago, mention that, that is the end goal.
Yes.
VSH chemical free is where we have to be.
Yep.
And
Or at least
it's
minimal
just,
chemical.
yeah, yes, that's probably, but yes,
Yeah.
accurate. Um, but what I find interesting is it's still kind of an afterthought, and it's like, well, we can make this happen a lot quicker
Yep.
if more people got on board with it with a true understanding of how to do it, right? Like
Yep.
set it and forget it might not be the best way to do it. I'm not saying that it can't be done. I mean, people are
Sure.
doing it that way. I mean, the true treatment free people, that's what they do. Set it, forget it, let nature do its thing.
That's not me.
But if right, but if you need any kind of production out of them, whether that's queens, pollination, honey, you name it, you're gonna have to manage them to some degree. And I think that there's different ways that you could do that, whether that's chemical
Yeah.
splits, brood breaking through splits, or like what you're explaining, where it's just aggressively going after those quality genetics.
Mhm.
But you, like as you were saying, it's not as if you just threw a bunch of bees in the box like I did and just waited for your winners and losers. You went after actually quality queens first, or shortly after
Yep.
you started, and then got started in that process. And so that kind of helped springboard that effort. And I think that commercial beekeepers could possibly do that. The question really becomes, if you've got one bad hive out of 10 that has a massive mite load, what does that do to its neighboring hives?
Yeah. I mean, you're gonna get, you'll get some robbing and some drift, certainly. But I mean, as soon as you find that that's a problem colony, deal with it. Like
Yep.
take the pitcher
Off
in the
off
grass.
with her head.
Yep, pitcher out in the grass and split them down. Give them a good brood break, and then requeen them with some of your queens from your better stock, and then rinse and repeat. But I wanted to elaborate too, because we touched on that I don't do alcohol washes, and we touched on that I do VSH instead, but I don't think I picked that apart very good. So
Yeah, I'd like you to break that down.
if I'm measuring VSH, they used to call it SMR, suppressed mite reproduction, like super straightforward. Well, then they changed it to VSH. This was after they figured it out in the USDA bee lab. They changed it to VSH because they figured out it was a hygienic response. So Varroa sensitive hygiene. And they got that because the bees know there's a reproductive mite in here. They'll open up the brood and throw her butt outside. And those young mites can't live on their own yet, so it totally shuts their reproduction down. And if there's a non-reproductive mite in there, they'll just leave her. She's not doing anything. They'll just leave it, which is odd. But I'm
So it's as if they understand the mite's biology.
yeah, and it has something to do with pheromones too, like stress pheromones from the brood if they know something's wrong, because they'll throw out high viral load pupa too. I would like to get into that too in a minute. But VSH measures the bee's ability to suppress mite reproduction. So if you have like a level 4 VSH, you could get a mite load. That's if they're robbing, you got neighbors that have crappy bees that are ate up with mites and they're bringing all these mites home. That's why I said alcohol wash could be a poor indicator. Could. Oftentimes it's a good indicator, but it's not foolproof, because you can have a VSH queen with a higher mite load and you would have culled her. But if you went in there and measured, she's not letting anybody reproduce. So if you checked them in the next spring, the mite load would probably be crazy low or non-existent. But while they're robbing or bringing all that home, their mite load will be higher. That's what I wanted to. That's why I don't do mite or alcohol washes. I go straight to the root cause of it all, and I'm measuring if they're actually letting the mites reproduce or not. That's what I was wanting to say.
Right, which is actually the accurate way to measure VSH.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you'd mentioned something about a level 4. Were you referring to like the mite load, or is there a graduated scale for VSH quality?
Yes, exactly. Option B. And if you go on Harbo Bee Company, like if you Google it, John Harbo, he's the USDA ARS bee scientist that discovered VSH and SMR. Same thing. He retired, but he sold breeder. He occasionally sells breeders. He's not selling any this year. But if you go on there and click on VSH and then click on measure VSH, it's all listed out. It tells you exactly what. And if it seems like it's too much, I made a video whenever I was working on my master's degree for entomology. I made a video because we've been doing it for a couple of years here. I made a video that it's on my YouTube channel. It's just how to measure or how to score bees for VSH, something like that. I'll have to look at the exact title.
Yeah, you give me the link and I'll put it on the show notes so people can check it out.
Cool. Sounds good. And I'll find it and send it to you. If you look at YouTube and just search for Stevens Bee Co.
Okay.
Then scroll through the videos. One of them's like selecting, I think it says selecting for VSH and honeybees. And it's like a 45-minute video. That was my independent research that just basically explains, how we go about it, how you number everything and keep track of stuff, how you test it, and then how you score it, which is actually what you were saying. And it's either 1, which is non-existent. You can't measure it, it's just not there. 2, they're doing a little bit, but they're, 3 is pretty good, but they're letting a few slip through the cracks, and 4 is a complete shutdown. Or like,
so
one of my friends calls it FSMR, which is fully suppressed mite reproduction.
FSMR, I think that's also like a I want to say that's like a X-ray screening as well, or something like that. It's an acronym for something else. I don't quite recall what it is. I think it's like wall scanning in construction, FSMR or something like that.
Pretty cool.
So when you're looking for the VSH, you're pulling frames out and pulling brood out. What does that process look like? And I'm assuming that's pretty labor intense.
It can be. It can be a little bit intense. Really what you do is you're looking for brood frames where the workers are starting to emerge. That gives the mites every possible chance to reproduce. And you pull at least 100. A lot of times 100 pupa will give you a score that, it's either no way they're getting their butts.
In like one circle, or do you just randomly?
It doesn't have to be in a circle. It just has to be 100 mature pupa. Like if they're white with purple eyes, that they're not quite there yet, and they kind of come apart when you pull them out. You want them to at least start to get pigmentation, or to be moving around about to come out. And then you pull them out and you're looking for mites, and you measure or you log, what the hive number was, and then you count how many non-reproductive mites, and then you count how many reproductive mites, and then you score it off of that.
Interesting.
But the problem there is,
I got to step my game up.
Yeah, well, I've gone off the deep end, as you can well tell, but I put it out there, and a lot of people have seen it, and a lot of my friends have started to do it too, and are sending me pictures of them doing VSH assays. So hopefully it catches on.
That's the beauty of kind of our system, is we let the people that are good at what they do, and we buy from them.
Yeah, and
Right?
let them spread the word. Like, I'm an open book. I don't really hide anything that I do. If you got a question, I just share.
Well, I think if your intentions are pure, there's no reason to hide behind. I mean, everyone makes mistakes. No one is perfect.
Yep.
And I think, we chatted a little bit about it, how some of these platforms can seem very canned, right? And for me, I get a bit turned off on that, because the vulnerability to me shows that it's likely a little bit more truthful,
Absolutely.
And can help people understand, hey, they've made mistakes to get to where they're at. I mean,
a lot.
Entrepreneur, right? And entrepreneur after entrepreneur. I mean, the famous quote is Thomas Edison, right? I don't remember the number, 5,000 ways how not to make a light bulb,
Exactly.
Right. You have to do that. It's the process of learning. It's the process of growth. Without failure, you are not growing. It's literally that simple.
Yeah.
If you're failing, it says you're trying.
Exactly.
And if you're not trying.
And the thing is too, is if you're open and you share with other people your successes and failures, the same thing happens. And then they'll show you things that you didn't see because you were blind to it, if you're not too arrogant to hear. And then you're better as a result of it. You know what I mean? I was sharing I had some visitors this last weekend that we were grafting queens and pulling queens and stuff. And I was talking about teaching a queen rearing course. And this one person was like, yeah, the bottom of these JZ cups, the pin is oval shaped. And I was like,
the pin is oval shaped. I've got JZ cups. What do
you know how they have
yes, on the bottom that goes into the frame?
Right. Well, if you rotate it goes in easy.
I had no idea.
A person who had never grafted is telling the master, if I may use that term, because I'd mastered queen rearing, something that they'd shoved thousands of and probably splitting some bars and never noticed it.
I've never noticed that.
I didn't either.
I'm always sitting there dripping wax down that little channel.
I used to.
And then sticking them to them.
Yeah,
I'll have to go take a look.
Yeah.
You just taught me something.
If you just give it a quarter turn, it'll go in. And then if it's still a little loosey-goosey, then just give it a little bit of a turn and you're good.
Which makes sense, because I remember the very first time I unpacked one of those, I went like, this thing's kind of a bit of a garbage. It doesn't stay in there very well.
Exactly. And some of those bars really suck. So some of
wood, right? Like there's all sorts of growth and ink.
The wood ones are actually good, but some of the wood ones suck. Like if they're straight, they just split apart. But like Man Lake for a while got smart and they made the bottom part thicker. And then where it sticks in the slots, that's thinner and it's way harder to split them. So not all wood bars
I think that's the one that I have, is the thick wooden one. I don't remember where I bought it, but
yeah, the ones I've got, I think, are Man Lake, maybe, or they came from Kelly Bees. Maybe some of them did. I've got a kind of a hodgepodge, but yeah, all the straight ones were in the trash. But anyway, yeah, it's if you, not to drag that out too far, but if you're open and you share, and you use your ears too, like you'll be better off, because people will share stuff that you didn't notice, and you should have maybe, but
right. So in your process of like, the first couple years, I mean, was there anything that really stood out that just kind of was that aha moment for you?
Queen rearing, like whenever when Thanos like gets the gloves with all the jewels on it and he like rules the world. Then
Yeah.
like once I got queen rearing, I was like, I can do anything now.
When you pulled your first frame out with the little peanuts hanging on it, like,
yeah, exactly.
oh.
Exactly. And then that's what changed it from, because it was expensive hobby for a while. My wife, she's kind of the accountant type, you know, she was getting real sick of me blowing money on bees because I was obsessed and I wasn't even making honey. You know, I was just having a great time, I guess. Or I don't know what I was doing. I wasn't being productive. But once I learned queen rearing, it switched from a money sucker to one that was actually making money. I guess
Of a side hustle.
Yeah, it became a side hustle. And then I get to take her on vacation and stuff, and then she's more receptive to my hobby. So yeah, it worked out.
I mean, 2000 is not a small number.
No, it's not. It's kind of a grind because I graft every Monday. Like I take off from my day job
every week.
Yeah, I every weekend I've got queens emerging, a couple hundred at least. You know, like I started off, it was over 300, but not quite 400 every week, like through April, and then I'm about done because it seems like the swarming impulse is starting to knock off a bit, and I'm getting a little tired because I keep a weekly instrumental insemination routine too. After I have weekly queens every Saturday, and then I ship them every Monday or Tuesday. And then like the following week after they're, 9 days of age or so, then they get artificially inseminated. So then I ship breeders that aren't yet laying yet that are freshly inseminated too. And it all.
So are you using drone sperm from your operation, or are you getting it from somewhere?
No, it's all like I'll graft out of all my breeders that made it through winter, or the 2-year-old plus breeders. I'll rotate those every week, and then we'll open mate a ton of them. And I'll go back and test all those colonies after they've been through Mother Nature's, gauntlet. And the ones that test very high for VSH, those are the ones I catch drones out of.
Okay.
Because they have no father, you know what I mean? They're a recombinated set of that queen's DNA. And if she's an F1 or a first generation queen, then and that colony is VSH, those drones are 100% VSH. And so I'll catch out the whole yard.
Okay. Can you explain like the F1, F2 process in identifying queens?
Yeah, it's basically like F1 is first generation, F2 is second generation, F3. So if you graft it out of a breeder queen and you get a daughter, that's an F1. If you graft out of that daughter, her daughter's an F2. If you graft out of that, F3. And there's a certain name for it. I don't know what it is. There's a specific name.
Do I? I've just noticed F1, F2 in like chicken breeds as well as bees. I don't know if it's in all aspects of like
breeding.
It is.
Whether it's plant, like one of my buddies is a soybean breeder. Exact same thing. F1, F2, F3.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
interesting.
I only graft out of instrumentally inseminated breeders, so I know who mom and dad are. But all the drones I catch are out of, some of them I catch out of breeders too, but a lot of them I catch out of F1s. And I clip them and mark them so I know how old they are. And I know for sure where they came from.
Well, and you were explaining that process of how you're putting an excluder like frame in front of those hives, preventing the drones from getting in. And so you end up with a congregation of drones waiting to go home.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, they're trying to get back home from the singles bar and the door is locked. And then I go around and bag them all.
Quite literally.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so whenever they're trying to get back in, they can't get through that excluder, but the workers can go through it. And then it's either me or my kids help catch, or my wife will help catch.
Start picking them up.
Yeah. And then I'll immediately take them. It's usually like Friday night, which that's why you don't want to be a bee breeder, because at 1 a.m. on Saturday morning, you're still extracting drone semen, instead of sleeping or doing fun stuff. Because I have to have that every week, because like Sunday afternoon or Monday, sometimes Monday midday, I'll inseminate queens that'll ship later that day or ship the following day.
So what percentage of your queens that you're shipping are virgins versus inseminated queens, and then do you sell any open mated queens?
No, that's what I was mentioning earlier, to where I can't. It's not worth it to me. Like I just hoard all my open mated queens. Unless
Okay.
I sell a few nucleus colonies, like open mated nukes, but I
Yeah,
really
you were
cut
mentioning
that
that.
down too. But the proportion of instrumentally inseminated versus virgin that I sell, like I only sell a batch of, 7 to 12 instrumentally inseminated queens a week, and then sometimes hundreds of virgins that week. So the instrumentally inseminated is few, just because there's so much labor in it. I can't do that many, not with a
Right.
day job.
Well, one of the things that I've kind of pondered doing and is, we're cold. I'm up in Wisconsin currently, and we're cold climate. I'd probably consider where you guys cold climate, to be honest.
Yeah, we see Sub-Zero.
Yeah, and I always thought that there would be a premium product in selling overwintered nucleus colonies,
Yeah.
to where you're using them to split, I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe August, split them in August, somehow, bulk them together, whether you're throwing them in a insulated box or something, just to keep them a little warmer during winter, and then selling them first thing in the springtime with packages, because we all know, like, packages obviously are coming off almonds. People are splitting them. They're just throwing queens in packages and they're getting shipped out. And then, a month later, people are starting to do their splits. And then that's when nukes become available. And once again, they're typically just bought queens, just tossed into a nucleus.
Right.
Or, in some cases, people are using the queens from a season ago, but longevity in queens is in question nowadays. And especially if you're not after a quality queen, that queen could be dying anytime soon.
Yeah.
So I always thought that it would be an interesting business model for someone to try to, make up 500 splits in July, August time period. Well, maybe a little later than that, August, September, and then overwinter them, and then sell the ones that made it for $300. You've already got proven winner there.
Yeah. I was gonna say you'd want to bump it up, because you're having to maintain them, and it's kind of a premium thing. There's always a trade-off. The only thing I don't like about it, is those are my powerhouses. Like whenever those things come out of, they're ready to go. So whatever I had that crapped out, you know what I mean? Like this year, I think we had maybe a 20% loss. Well, those are the ones I want to go throw in all my double deep stuff, because they got honey supers done already right now. So that's the first thing I don't like about it. So you
3 boxes, you said, right?
Yeah, and I don't make that much around
Which is
here.
great.
You're lucky if you get 2 supers off of a good double.
So what, 150 pounds of honey on one already for the season? That's pretty darn good.
Yeah, and they'll do more late summer, when soybeans and stuff start blooming. But the other downside to it is just, you'd want to warn people if they're a new beekeeper. It's like they want to swarm, because they're so, even if you made them, some people are like, if it's after the summer solstice, blah, 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 blah.
Oh, yeah.
After they go through winter, they want to throw swarms like freaking crazy. But which is okay, because they're rocking and rolling so much if you know what you're doing. But if you're a new beekeeper, you kind of get thrown to the wolves, and you're already managing swarming. So it's a trade-off.
Well, I would think, though, if you're taking a 5-frame, throwing it in, even if you're just running one brood box, you probably buy yourself a month and a half, 2 months before you need to really.
Probably, yeah.
Depending, obviously they're going to have their resources in there, and probably 3 frames full of brood at that point in time, right?
Well, like you said, if you sold it for more, like 300, versus if you're not trying to match packages and nukes coming out of the south, if you put a premium on it, it would probably be worth it. But that's the thing is, like, those are powerhouses, so you're selling.
Right. Well, and I think that you got to tell that story, though. There's so much money in bee packages that part of me, and I'm not a conspiracy theory minded person at all, very logic based, but sometimes I question whether or not the people selling bees, and I sell bees myself, so I'll just leave that on the table. If they almost don't mind the fact that they're dying, every year because it's a guaranteed revenue stream, right? And bees are where a lot of the money is.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, they're selling a quarter of their hive and a queen that they might have, let's say paid $30 for, and a plastic bee bus for $5 for $100, and it ends up making it to the consumer anywhere from 130 to $190.
Yeah.
There's a lot of money to be made there. And so I think, though, if you educate the consumer and say, if you buy the bees and you manage their swarming tendencies or their potential swarming tendencies, you're not going to buy bees next year. So that $300 is really a cheap investment.
Yeah, exactly. Or if they try to swarm, make 2 beehives out of it.
Right.
Then you might have 2 beehives.
And sell your nuke.
Right, exactly. That's the thing, is to
right.
going like that. And I have repeat customers, but I don't think it's because their bees are dying. I think it's because they're having really good luck with it and they want more queens that are going to be able to.
Well, if they had bad luck, I would imagine that they wouldn't be buying from you again.
Exactly.
Saying that they're VSH, right? Like, oh, this VSH queen keeps dying on me. I'll just keep buying from them.
Exactly. And I mean, bees have problems. Like the most mite resistant bees you've got will totally starve to death if you have a crappy fall bloom and you didn't feed them, and you know what I mean? So
right,
you're going to still have loss, but you shouldn't have 60-70% loss. If you're paying attention and you're using good stock, right. It should be a lot more manageable to where it's actually sustainable.
Right. And this year I had quite a few make it through winter, and because we had that weird, I don't know if down there you guys experienced it, but it was like it got nice and warm. It felt like spring was coming, and then winter came back for a month.
Yeah, it did here.
And when I went out and checked the bees, they were doing just fine, flying good when that first thing of spring, and I should have fed them. I failed. But what happened is they lost, they didn't have any more food. By the time I went back here a month or so ago, the ones that I thought made it through winter were dead.
Yeah. And I had some that most of mine, which I did put some syrup on it. I think I squeaked them through, but I put syrup on it because I pulled the frames that should have been full of honey still.
They're
and I was
empty.
like, oh gosh, it was all brewed. And then it was like, there was nothing.
Oh,
I mean, there was
really
0 stores. So whatever they were bringing in, they were just on fumes. And so I hit them with.
They were living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they were doing. Any variation in weather, they would toast because there was too much brood. They were trying to food or feed.
Yeah, and I think that's what happened to several of mine. There was 2 of them that I opened up where must have been 2 inches of dead bees in the bottom. Ones that were flying, so they must have just starved like that.
Yeah, it happens.
There's nothing to rob from.
Right. And whenever they're raising brood, like from what I've, I know that whenever they're not raising brood, they're running 60 some odd degrees in a cluster. And then whenever they're raising brood, it's 90 something. So basically, if you have your heat off and then you turn it on 90 degrees, what's your electricity bill going to do? That's what that's honey. Then as the electricity or their.
Yeah. And they're doing it through metabolizing that sugar, and I think that gets a bit lost too. I mean, I've got Hyperhive, which is an insulated beehive, and there's some really scientifically backed evidence that says insulated beehive is the way to go. It reduces their need to cover the brood, and so they're able to do kind of more activities versus just stuck trying to keep the brood warm or cool them for that matter in the summertime. Both well as gives them the ability. I mean, how many times? I mean, I run uninsulated hives as well as insulated hives, and I don't know how many times I've opened up a dead out where they're obviously starved, right? Where all the butts are sticking out of cells, and just 2 inches away is an entire corner of honey. But they just can't get to it because they're too cold.
Yeah. Whereas if they were insulated, they might be able to scoot over a bit, and actually.
Right. And that's kind of where it's like, it gets this really weird dynamic in information. Like we talked about it in our call yesterday. I look at it like you've got freeways, you've got side streets, and then you've got, your neighborhood streets. And each of these highways might be treatment free or chemical or a top bar hive or a Langstroth hive. And without explaining how you got to your, your city street in front of your house, no one really has any idea how that information might correlate with a problem.
Right.
And so like saying, oh, my bee's starved. Well, why? Is it because they couldn't get to it? Is it because there wasn't enough there? Was it because maybe they were too good of bees and there was such a big booming population? There's all these crazy variables.
Yeah.
And so there's not a straight answer for every single problem. And that's where I think it's very interesting. And sometimes turning to the internet almost makes it worse.
All the time. And I know some people probably get mad at me because I answer questions with questions a lot of times.
Right.
Because it's complex. Like I know they want a black and white answer, but welcome to the world of gray.
Right.
Which is why I love it.
Depends. It depends.
Like, I hate you. I'm gonna ask the internet. You clearly don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
Can't give me
where the internet should be telling you it depends, they're giving you a black and white answer.
Exactly.
But something tells me a website that says it depends won't get much traffic.
Right. But I think it's really effective on the people that are going to go places with bees, because it wakes them up to all the variables that they need to be thinking about. It's not black and white. It depends on this, or depends on this, or depends on and it's like, oh man. Well, I love that. Otherwise I would get bored with it. I love the variables and complex problem solving, otherwise I would.
Right. Yeah.
I learn new stuff all the time. Oh, there was one thing I wanted to circle back on too. We were talking about VSH and testing for VSH and stuff. And in that video that I'll give to you to put in the link below, it basically says like what can you expect if you're using VSH bees, actual VSH bees, not just what somebody said was VSH bees, because that's a problem too, unfortunately. But that's where testing comes in too. You can see for yourself. But the first thing I noticed was a complete lack of deformed wing virus, at least expressed. I knew it was probably still there, but it just evaporated. I used to see it all the time. And then whenever I would replace those queens with VSH queens, in 6 weeks or so, it was completely gone. And that wasn't with a treatment and a requeen, which isn't a bad idea. It's not a bad position.
Just give them a clean slate to start with.
Yep, exactly. I just didn't want to do that because I wanted to see what the actual genetics did exclusively. So, and then it was kind of cool too, because Randy Oliver later was asking for samples because he wanted to sample them for deformed wing virus. And he specifically asked for some treatment-free apiaries, probably so they could go, oh my God, look how horrible they look.
Yeah, he hates treatment-free people.
Yeah, but instead...
Randy, I love you, but you hate treatment-free people.
But instead, my results came back, deformed wing virus A, below quantifiable levels, deformed wing virus B, below quantifiable levels, deformed wing virus C, none.
Really?
And those nasty, untreated bees. But it depends. It totally depends. Are you running just XYZ bees or package bees, or are you running something that is specifically selected to have strong host resistance that we now know how to measure? And that was the factor. And some people, I think too, like they'll see bees that are too hygienic. You've heard that? Like, oh my God.
I did not. No.
Hygienic. I've heard it on forums, which that's the internet, but
forums are like, I swear, the internet's nasty brother.
It is, or the dark underbelly. Yeah.
Right.
But I see phenomenal brood patterns because I've got diverse stock too. But so that's kind of a misnomer. It's misinformation. They used to see that in the early days of the VSH breeding project at the USDA bee lab, but they just requeened the psychos, and it was a non.
So they were mean.
No, they were like psychotic about ejecting brood, like overly.
Oh, like you just end up with brood piled out in front.
Yeah, their population wouldn't even build because they're throwing all their
Right.
babies
Shucking out the babies.
Right. Yeah. So
Huh.
they probably had
Which might have almost, which could have even been like over amplified VSH quality.
But that's the thing though, is you can get beautiful brood patterns and have a level 4. So something was wrong there. Something was
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
that's why I'm saying I have that object of comparison where I can see these phenomenal looking brood patterns, which you'll see some open faced brood and recapped stuff, you know, where they opened it up and we're like, okay, it's okay.
So where you'll be just kind of spotty at
Yeah.
times. Okay.
Yeah, if your mite levels climb or you have problems, the brood might look spotty because they're throwing everything out or throwing a lot of stuff out. But under normal circumstances, the brood patterns should look absolutely normal. You just may see some that's uncapped. Like, have you ever seen it where some people call it bald brood? You can see the face of the brood. I'll show you. You can look on my website and see.
Like through the capping?
Yeah, there's no cap. Like they.
Oh, yes, I have seen that. Yep.
See a purple eyed. You know what I mean? You see the pupae in there. Well, you'll see that.
So that's.
It's an.
Is that part of the process then of the VSH quality? Is that they just haven't thrown that bee out yet?
Exactly.
Or they'll keep the bee in there.
Or they opened it up because they were suspicious and it passed inspection. So sometimes they'll recap it. Uncap recap is massive with VSH bees. Sometimes they'll recap it and sometimes they just get lazy or something and just leave it. It'll still emerge. There's nothing wrong with the pupa. You can just see its face.
Taking a look at you. Well, I always was kind of curious because what's the age? It's an Apis cerana.
Yeah. Asian bee.
You know, they have a totally different capping system to where it's thicker and there's like a little tiny vent hole in the middle.
The pinhole on it is weird.
Yeah, and so I always was, and they're, you know, and they've had no problems with mites now or with varroa.
Yeah. There are very few. It's more of an annoyance than a death sentence. And I think if we like really adopt disease resistant or mite resistant stocks, that's what it'll go to. They're an annoyance, not a death
eventually. Yeah, eventually. I mean, I have no doubt that eventually we will get there. It's just, it's a big ship and she takes a while to turn.
You're exactly right. Well said. But if more people I think like how we'll get there isn't like Cory coming to save the world with his glove on, you know, of truth.
Well, I'm going to order some of your bees, so I'm going to solve it around here.
Okay, good deal. But I would say don't just buy them, like select for them too. So like come up with your own Wisconsin blend, or somebody on the East Coast needs to have their own little, and if everybody has their own little VSH tested stock, we'll never have diversity problems, because if it's all coming from one breeder, you know what I'm saying?
You got problems.
One genetic line. Yeah, you want to outcross it locally and then test it and then graft from the ones that do really well in your area. And if everybody did that, we would have a bazillion different VSH lines to select from. Well, let's use Mike's. It's more of a northern adapted. It loves that cold weather. You know what I mean? And can hang.
Yeah.
It's super conservative on stores. You know, let's cross it with this because we want to make something. You know what I mean? And then you've got
and I think it's encouraging because you've got the USDA USDA just came out with what's that bee breed that they just named?
Halo.
What is it? Halo, yeah, it's something like that. And it's primarily commercial based, right? To where they can survive, they thrive and survive in southern climates, and then pretty much making that loop, right? From California down to Texas and then up to the cranberries, pretty much, right? Like, which is all sorts of temperature temperaments. And so I think it's good. To me, it's like, the private sector always solves the problems way faster than the government does, right? Because you got to make money. And so money's the motivator to get, money's the motivator to get it moving and get it going. Where the government, we just keep giving them money for them to just kind of tool and test, which has its own benefits, because they're able to maybe spend some time to figure something out where someone that's going to make money won't and can't, right? Or short term.
Exactly. But that's where we want to see what works. If it doesn't work or if it's not functional, not interested.
On to the next one. Right.
Move on.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Where, like a USDA of the world, it's, well, why didn't it work? What are the other aspects that didn't? We're like, nope, squish that sucker. Let's get a new one.
Move on. Yeah, exactly.
Right. We're after the finish line. We don't care how pretty it looks.
You're right. And I spoke with Garrett Dodds. He's a tech at the USDA ARS Bee Lab, which I haven't published that one yet on my YouTube channel. I'm waiting on his approval for, our conversation. But he talks a little bit about those helo bees. And they're basically doing commercial stock. They're using instrumental insemination, and they're using some type of VSH assay. There's different host resistance mechanisms. There's, allo grooming or auto grooming, like Purdue mite biters or whatever. They're allo groomers. There's general
where they're taking it off the bee itself.
Yeah, they're
as they come in.
Yeah, like that's pretty cool. But VSH, that's where it's at, man. It's like they go on the
well, it's the root cause, right? Like
exactly.
That's where they're breeding. Right.
There's no problem,
Right. Yeah. But, just shooing them off to the front porch and allowing them to crawl back in doesn't necessarily solve the real problem.
Right. Or maybe after we get VSH concentrated, maybe we could add allo grooming too to a certain percent.
Right.
And then they're not safe anywhere. Right. They're not safe in the brood, and they're not safe in the phoretic phase.
Well, and that goes right down to that, segments of gene pool from the drones. If we've got 20% that are true VSH with the cells, 20% grooming, the rest are nice as can be and honey collecting fools or nectar collecting fools.
Exactly. And then the mites.
So what, right. So do you have a specific bee breed that you are using? I mean, is it a bit of a mutt? Is it Carnolian, Italian?
Kind of a mutt. It's more predominantly Italian, but I would say, like, if you have a vision of a stereotypical Italian, you should probably throw it out the window. Like most Italians historically were the worst for mite resistant. Well, these are better than most everything else. They're testing extremely high. A lot of Italians will eat themselves out of house and home. Well, this isn't a great honey production area, and I don't feed a ton. So those weeded themselves out of the gene pool. So I would say this is a more conservative Italian. But on the same token, I've got some breeders that throw some level of dark queens too. Like not straight.
I love dark queens.
Well, you'll probably want some out of a couple of my other breeders. Whenever I was crossing with Harbo stock to get my VSH scores up where they needed to be, he doesn't select for color. He could care less what color they are, as long as they seek out and destroy mites.
Right.
So whenever I made some crosses with his, I got some darker stock and light stock too, but that's where some of the darker stuff came from. I've got some that throw kind of a tiger stripe looking queen, or there's an occasional black queen that comes out too. So
I have not had until this year the Cardovans. Have you seen one of those?
I've got
oh,
one
they're just
I've been
beautiful.
Out of throws about 5 to 7% Cordovan daughters. They look like
they're the easiest queen to spot in the hive. I mean, they almost glow.
They're almost fluorescent.
Right.
Yeah.
I was helping a guy pack down in Utah about a month or so ago, and he's like, and I was just there to ultimately kind of transport. And so he's like, and I had my suit on, and he's like, will you help me? We're behind. I'm like, sure. And so he's like, we're just need to queen check these nukes. And so I'm pulling the nukes up, and I thought my eyes were just playing tricks with me. And I'm like, there's like 1 out of every 5 of these bees are like glowing. And I'm like, there's something. And I felt stupid. So I was like, I'm not going to say anything. I must just be tired. And then the next day he's like, oh, look at these and I had no idea any of them were Cardovan. And he's like, look at this Cardovan queen. And I'm like, holy cow, they glow. And he goes, yeah. And then look at her offspring, and they're like a red bee, right? Like, and I'm like, they kind of look like they're glowing.
You know what?
And I'm like, last night I was going to say something to you, but I thought you guys would think I was crazy.
Yeah. You know how that works?
Kind of. It's one gene subset, right?
Yeah. Where everything's black on a normal queen, like her thorax or face or legs, that's black there. that Cordovan gene's recessive gene, it mutes that. So it like turns it off. And so everywhere that's normally black is like a burnt orange. And the drone,
Yeah.
gorgeous. I mean, they look like
Really? I've not seen a drone.
Yeah, they look like a little I call them sunburst. I mean, it's just a Cordovan.
Really?
Whenever I'm catching out of my breeders, because I've got a percentage of those that they'll throw Cordovan drones, not 100%, but they stick out so much. They're just orange. They're really pretty.
Yeah.
But
Cool.
interesting stuff.
Well, once you get the VSH, then we can start selecting for all the pretty genes.
Exactly.
Right? Right.
Get the mites first and foremost, and then we'll play
Do
with
pretty. Pretty's next.
Exactly. We'll go for pretty later. Yeah. But the thing is these ones that are throwing Cordovans, they're highly VSH.
They are.
Yep. So it's just like, well, it's just genetics. You got to tinker and select and keep that selection pressure on it, and then you can add or subtract whatever you want,
Right. Which at the end of the day, it really seems very simple.
It is. Yeah, it's not that difficult. That's the thing with VSH.
Not, and I'm not saying what you do is simple. I'm saying just like
breeding,
getting the genes to a point where we need them to is somewhat of a simple process. It's
throw away what doesn't work and keep what does, and then just keep throwing away, keep separating wheat from chaff, and then rinse and repeat over and over and over.
Yep. And I think that it's a safe bet to use, surveys kind of like the Bee Informed to kind of get a sense of like, as a whole, as what we are doing as beekeeping. And I could say as a whole, right now we're treating bees. It's not working. It's not working.
And
at least the way we're doing it.
It's like not working this way. Eventually it's going to go.
Right. Yes.
Because after
then
that,
we have real problems.
Then we got real problems. So before we get to that point, let's mitigate. Let's select for some host resistance and get a little of that in there. And then whenever amatraz crashes and is completely worthless, like fluvalinate and some of the old stuff we used, it's not a deal breaker. It sucks. We'll probably want to look for something else for worst case scenarios, but it's not going to end us, And they were talking about even oxalic being ineffective.
Which that to me is scary, but it makes sense. I mean,
well, Cameron Jack spoke at our state meeting. I'm past president for Missouri State Beekeepers, and he was at our state meeting out of University of Florida. He basically said the approved dosage is about 25% of what the effective dose needs to be.
Really?
Yeah, so that's the worst too, and it makes me wonder, did they do that with amatraz? Because you don't want it to be too hot, but you definitely don't want it to be too weak, because that accelerates mite resistance.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If you don't get a good kill, if you're just giving them sublethal doses of stuff, that's like spraying nitrous to the finish line on making acaricide resistant mites, which is a nightmare.
Well, I mean, you could use antibiotics in humans as a prime example of that, right?
Same concept. Yeah.
You throw antibiotics at a kid for their entire young adulthood or their entire youth, and they're useless to them as adults.
Exactly. Same concept. It works that way in almost any aspect of nature. Any kind of pesticides in beans or corn. Same thing. Like even the best stuff we come out with, after a few years, nature starts weaving its way around it.
So that gentleman was saying that people are using it at a higher level than the label, or that we are really
both, and that the label,
that's not good.
The amount. Well, here's the thing: it actually isn't as bad as they thought, because the approved amount is too light. It's not effective. That's the approved amount. So, and don't quote me on this. I'll have to go back and look. And I think
I won't. I may even cut that.
No, leave it in there, because then people will dig and go see what exactly is. Because I think it is, they approved 1 gram per colony, but a totally effective dose is like 4 grams per colony.
Which is actually breaking the law.
It is. But if you abide by the law, that's
you're gonna
accelerating
doom
mite
the
resistance.
bees.
We're
Right.
doomed either way. You know what I mean? So it's like,
That's
what
not
do you do?
good.
And that's what I'm worried about amitraz. Is the approved dose too light? Because that'll accelerate mites resistant to amitraz. It needs to be it's somewhere in the middle. You don't want it
Right.
super like over the top hot, and you don't want it too light. You want to get a good kill, to where you're not leaving many mites left, because those are the ones that will breed and create resistance. It's just a matter of
Well,
time.
maybe I'll do a little digging and see if I can't maybe add some posts to the notes as well.
Yeah,
Just
that
for
would be
someone to
good.
start their research if they choose to.
Yeah, but I mean,
Because as anyone trying to educate themselves, don't believe everything we're just telling you.
exactly.
Like, if you got a question, do
Yep.
some research.
And even the people that are doing cool things, I mean, don't question them, annoying.
Just to question them. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, where you're just trying to take them out or discredit them. But I mean, poke them a little bit, because they don't know it all. I don't know it all. We don't have it all figured out yet. And if we don't ask questions, then how are we supposed to learn? Or if we don't challenge.
Right. I mean, even for the person providing the information, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, there's a bit of a hole in my understanding, and maybe I need to fill it.
Yeah, exactly. And then we'll all be better as a result. It's like back whenever I started,
Right.
like the word on the street was you can't keep bees without treatment. And then part of me is like, I don't buy it.
Well, it's funny because like I started this podcast as like wanting a very, very general view of beekeeping, right? And it's probably a bit of my own curiosity, but I keep gravitating towards treatment-free people. And I always kick myself. And a gentleman that I actually have been chatting with a little bit electronically to be a guest was like, well, I'm not treatment free. I don't know if I should go on your show. And I'm like, oh God, my show already seems treatment free. I'm like, great. I'm like, but that's my opinion, right? And so I probably the very first few episodes, I was like, I'm just going to play neutral. And for the most part, I my thought process is neutral.
Yeah.
But
I would say mine is too, really. And
and I mean, well, right. And there's some people out there that, we're to start talking about like, treat the hive to kill off the mites to kind of reset it. Most true treatment free people are like, oh no, shame on you,
Yeah. But logically, I'm like, that's not a bad idea.
Right. But that's where I think that the chemicals can play a role, right?
Definitely.
And
they have their place. Like that, you got to go back to IPM. They have their place, but we're clearly overly reliant on them. We've missed the foundation, or have been lazy about concentrating and targeting that real resistance.
Right. And we know beekeepers are not lazy, right? It's one of the hardest freaking jobs.
Big time. I would agree.
It's coal mining without the black lung.
Exactly. It stings and heat exhaustion and bad
right. So it can be not fun. I gotta never mind. I'm not even gonna mention it. I got stung in a place the other day that is X-rated. I was like, why do I do this?
I too have been stung everywhere you can imagine.
But I just like, I forget even where I was. What was I talking about? I don't even remember. But yeah, I fear that my curiosity brings me down an avenue that I think is the solution, right? Like, and a lot of times we get fed information from quote unquote experts, and I'm not claiming I'm an expert in anything, right? I'm just curious, and that curiosity brings me places that hopefully are the answer. And I probably need to work maybe a little bit harder to get some people on here that have totally polar opposite opinions, and not have a hash out, but just get that information out there, right? And let people decide.
Discussion, you know what I'm saying, where nobody's getting offended or name calling and going down that path. If you can have an honest discussion of two people hashing it out, That's how we figure stuff out. You know what I'm saying? If you're just in an echo chamber to where all you hear is treatments are bad, commercial beekeepers are bad, like, you're wrong, dude. Like, get out of that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that by any means, and I know you're not either. It's just, I
think it is the ultimate path, though, because now here's the caveat. It is the ultimate, host resistance is the ultimate path. But a lot of treatment-free people get really dogmatic about it. It's almost kind of like a religion with all of its heavy dogma and no.
Well, it's the classic example of what is it? Perfect is the enemy of the good. You know, it's like, you can't be perfect. You know, we need to work towards perfection.
Right. Or are you even actually selecting? And if you're not, or are you just not doing anything? Because a lot of treatment people are just not doing anything. Well, that's not the right answer either. You know what I mean? Like, you want to be selecting for something. And then if Mother Nature gives you something that's been selected and does have host resistance, well, you need to be able to raise queens from it and stuff. And I've had people throw rocks at me because my queens were artificial because I grafted them. I'm like, come on now. I can't shoot royal jelly out my mouth. I can't even build wax. They did that, not me.
Right.
They're not artificial.
Well, and then it's acceleration of what is already natural, right?
That's
like,
it.
You're creating a situation and to me that's how you get right back to the whole private enterprise. Like, our goal is to get to that finish line as quick as possible because we don't have money to burn.
Right.
You know, and so that might be the pure way of doing it, but how do you scale that?
Yeah, it has to make
sense. You're going to go in every hive and then slide a cage on a naturally drawn out queen cell? No, and maybe get 5 out of it.
Right, exactly. It doesn't make sense. Whereas mine, I can pull them out, you know, I can pick them off one by one, put them in cell protectors, distribute them as cells, emerge them, put them in candy cages, next day air them. You know, and then people have a good start of something, but I don't know. My way is not.
And I mean, for your average beekeeper, you know, it's just at home, or even like a small, you know, hobby guy or gal for that matter, that has, you know, 50 hives. That might be a totally viable way of doing it, but you're selling VSH queens and you can't do it. You got to do it the efficient way.
Yep. And here's the thing too, is everybody's going to do it different. My way is not the only way. A lot of it depends on what's your goal, you know, what's your end goal. If your end goal is just to have 20 colonies and not have to buy honey and have a little bit to sell, well, your path is going to be different than mine. That's trying to breed and select for something and offer, you know, concentrated specific genetics. Like, it doesn't mean that is wrong. Just different focus, man. That's all.
Right. Good. Well, I think we could probably talk for 2 more hours, and which probably would not be good. So I think that we should save the rest for next time.
I agree. I think it was a productive conversation, and
it was. I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for joining, and you know, we will certainly stay in touch. And you know, I'll get your link out there. People going to order from you. Any VSH queens that they like, I'm gonna place an order. I know that for sure.
Cool.
Get some genetics up
left on shipping virgin queens. Like, I'll ship next Tuesday the 31st because Monday's a holiday, and then I'll be shipping June 6th. I may have some after that, but I'm planning on just making some for myself. So I'll sell if I have any extra, and then I'll probably close it down for the year, because whenever we start getting closer to July, if we don't get good rain here and it gets hot, they're done raising queens.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, we'll talk offline about it and see what we can do.
Sounds great, Mike. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the conversation. I think it was productive and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did too. So
we'll catch up again soon.
Yep. See you next time.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep. Later.
See ya.
How to get up, walk away. Know when to hold them, know when to fold, know when to hold them, know when to fold. Cold sweat, blood in my eyes.